Hello and welcome to our presentation on Latin America's 5G outlook. My name is Sebastián Pérez Ferreiro and I'm the managing editor of BN Americas. I will begin the presentation with the main points of our ICT Outlook 2021 report, which is focused on the region launching its first commercial 5G networks, following much anticipated spectrum tenders. The full report is available on the BN Americas platform and attendees will receive an email allowing them to download it. Following my brief presentation, we will have a 5G focused discussion with Eduardo Ricotta, who heads LatAm South at ICT service provider Ericsson, and Maryleana Mendez, General Secretary of Telecom Association ASIET. But first, let's discuss the lead up to the full launch of 5G in Latin America. Chile set the 5G engines humming with the launch of the region's first spectrum auction designed for the new technology. The government is awarding 1.8 gigahertz of spectrum in 4 bands. 5 operators have submitted bids, which are being reviewed by a commission. Awarding is expected in February. Brazil's spectrum auction to license its first 5G frequencies is planned for the first half of 2021. The country plans to award about 2 gigahertz in the 700 megahertz, 2.3 gigahertz, 3.5 gigahertz, and 26 gigahertz bands. Peru is also working to have a 5G spectrum tender ready for the first half of next year. Authorities put to consultation a proposal for awarding frequencies in the 3.5 gigahertz and 26 gigahertz bands for 5G services, as well as in the 6 gigahertz band for Wi-Fi 6. Mexico's regulator plans to award 3.5 gigahertz bands while also considering the 1.5 and 2.5 gigahertz bands. Some Mexican operators already hold some spectrum blocks in the 3.5 gigahertz, although not enough to provide adequate 5G services. And Colombia expects to start bidding 5G frequencies by September of next year. Operators there are testing 5G in 5 cities with 45 base stations using temporary spectrum licenses. Uruguay, the first country to activate a 5G network in Latin America, is working on a spectrum and connectivity policy that emphasizes the new technology, which it expects to have ready by the first quarter. The regulator there will also authorize mobile operators to carry out 5G pilots using temporarily assigned spectrum in the 26 gigahertz band. Many market players are hopeful that the lead up to 5G will bring telcos' planned capital expenditures to pre-pandemic levels. Most of the telcos are not offering capex guidance for 2021, as too many uncertainties remain in play. In a preliminary analysis carried out at the beginning of the pandemic, S&P Global predicted a drop of 10 to 20% in capex for 2020. And Latin America's largest telco, América Móvil, recorded a 9% year-on-year drop in investments during the third quarter to around $4.5 billion. To take a more general big picture view of the region's ICT industry, 5G will enable higher levels of digitization, artificial intelligence, IoT, automation, and virtual and augmented reality that will all rely on higher levels of performance, ultra-high speed, and low latency to be made possible by 5G. Furthermore, the transition from 4G to 5G could give Latin America a powerful economic boost as the new technology improves productivity in several key industries. If the 6 largest economies in Latin America were to pursue an expansive mobile strategy, they could ultimately add $250 billion to their aggregate GDP, according to the study, The Value of Digital Transformation Through Expansive Mobile in Latin America. To this end, governments and regulators need to adopt national spectrum policy measures to encourage rapid deployment and consider reasonable network rollout investments as substitute to upfront cash payment for spectrum fees. The industry recommends that regulators make available 80 to 100 megahertz in contiguous spectrum per operator, and that inflating spectrum prices should be avoided, as it risks limiting network investment, slowing down network speeds, and driving up the cost of services. I'm joined now by our regional ICT analyst and author of our ICT 2021 Outlook report, Pedro Osores, who will lead a 5G discussion with Eduardo Ricotta, president of LatAm South at Ericsson, and Maryleana Mendez, general secretary of ASIET. We would like to remind the audience that you are on mute mode and that you can use the chat function to submit questions to the panel. Pedro, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Seb, for this very insightful sector overview. I would also like to thank the audience for the interest in our 5G webinar, and in particular, our panelists, Maryleana, Mendez and Eduardo Ricotta, both very important names from two key telecom sectors. Maryleana here representing the public and private telecom companies operating in Latin America, and Ricotta as the leader for South America of one of the world's three main suppliers of network equipment for operators, which is Ericsson. So as we saw in the presentation, 5G will be the hottest topic of the telecom industry next year, with this series of spectrum tenders scheduled to take place in the main markets in the region. Chile, as we saw, led the line in November and is expected to announce winners in February. In this sense, I ask both of you, Maryleana and Eduardo, from your own market perspectives, what can we expect from these auctions, and more broadly from public policies related to 5G? Maryleana, I think we can start with you, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Can you hear me well?
We can.
Okay, thank you very much. Regarding the question about the process of arrival to the region of the 5G networks, it's important to consider that even though 5G is the second faster technology regarding deployment, only behind the 2G networks, the deployment in Latin America, according to the international analysts, will have a slower pace in comparison with other developed regions like Asia, Australia, Europe, and North America. It is important to mention that there are reasons for this slower development and adoption of the new technology. And for sure, one and the most important is the impact of the pandemic in the operators' finances. And also some other conditions that like legacy regulations still in place, currencies devaluation, high spectrum fees, and among others. So there are some key issues to be resolved in Latin America in order to foster the development of 5G. Even though, as you mentioned at the beginning, there are three countries in Latin America, Uruguay, Brazil, and Colombia, that are testing networks. And in the Caribbean region, there are 4 more 5G networks already deployed, and some in tests, some already functional. So the path to 5G is still full of obstacles that will be needed to be removed by the public policies in order to have a better perspective for this new technology. And regarding the spectrum tenders, exactly what you mentioned, only Chile has opened a spectrum tender for 5G. And other countries decided to postpone their own processes due to the pandemic. And also from my point of view, it is necessary to review the spectrum auctions or tenders, and even think about a reinvention of this type of processes in the current circumstances. Other regions of the world, like Japan and New Zealand, for example, are assigning a spectrum for 5G in a very innovative way, with low or zero upfront payments and attached to plans to develop the network. The idea behind is to foster investment, which is critical for 5G, considering the density of infrastructure density that is necessary. So a new regulatory approach definitely will be needed, and also a profound review of the fiscal framework. A regulatory sandboxes and test beds are needed, And Colombia is the leader in this type of innovative regulation approaches. And I think this will be definitely a key issue for the 5G deployment in our region.
Thanks, Maryleana. I think we'll go back to some of the points you mentioned, very interesting ones. Let me go to Eduardo Ricotta. We're repeating the question to Maryleana. How is Ericsson seeing the arrival of 5G in the region, taking into account these announcements of spectrum tenders we are having, and also this innovative way of regulatory approach brought up and mentioned by Maryleana? How are you seeing, how is Ericsson seeing these upcoming spectrum tenders?
Yeah, hello everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today to discuss about 5G with all of you. No, I think first we seen the arrival of a 5G to boost the economy, especially after this critical year that we have. And we really believe that 5G will be the most important platform for the next 10 years because it will allow faster digitalization of many sectors in the industry. I'm talking about health, I'm talking about education, industry 4.0, agribusiness. So there are several areas that will boost the digitalization with 5G. And we are very happy to support that growth. And I think it will, of course, we have a lot of demands that will come from public policy. And I think Maryleana talked about one of them that is for me, I think it's the most important one, is how we do the auctions in order to operators to get frequency. Because for me, the way that we do the auctions will define how much investment will go for the infrastructure. Because as we did a study a couple of months ago, and if you look, for instance, the spectrum cost, comparing 40 countries and taking consideration the GDP of the countries, if you look, Brazil and Peru is one of the highest spectrum in the world. So, when you look, for instance, Chile, you see a very, very good model, maybe the best model we have in Latin America countries and the best model that we have in the world. It's they use as a beauty contest. You pay the minimum fee on the frequency, and then you have you have to build the infrastructure. Because always, I think it's very, very important the cost for spectrum in this, especially when it comes to 5G, because the pocket of the operators is just one. Either they spend the money to acquire a spectrum, or they put money on infrastructure. If they put money on infrastructure, we have seen that they are going to get, the population will get two benefits. The first one is the society, because we are going to have a larger coverage, covering more schools, cities, agribusiness that is not well covered today. So you are going to benefit the population. And secondly, in case of some countries, is it the case of Brazil? If you have a much large infrastructure, you are going to connect more people. If you connect more people, we have been doing another study showing that the government, it will get more taxes if everybody put money on infrastructure. So you benefit the society and also the government. We need, of course, we expect that we have an auction next year for most of the countries, and I am very curious to see how it will be the auctions, especially on the cost part.
Thanks, Ricotta. I think both of you guys agree on the importance of having lower spectrum fees for the tenders. And actually, Maryleana also brought other important points like important roadblocks for operators in this path towards 5G, which is legacy networks, the currency fluctuation, and even the pandemic. So having all these in perspective, these needs and requirements for a proper 5G spectrum tender and so 5G development, I ask you, Maryleana, Eduardo was mentioning the beauty contests format that Chile pursues, and we know that other countries are also looking towards having lower spectrum fees in the auctions and put higher investment commitments instead. Do you see that way? Do you share that view? Do you see other countries moving into that direction, considering the fiscal restrictions and maybe the need to collect a lot of revenues? How are you seeing that?
Well, it's an excellent question. Definitely, the situation is not the best because the fiscal income and in general the income for the governments is in a very low level right now. So in this way, the digitalization must be turned into a general public policy in order to have the commitment of the different authorities in this type of change regarding the spectrum auctions. I mean, we need finance ministry definitely involved and convinced that the digitalization is the way to go to recover after the pandemic. Regarding the beauty contest, I think it's a possibility, a good possibility, but even in this type of tender, we really need to have a balance regarding the obligations attached to the spectrum. So sometimes the obligations are extremely high, and even it's difficult to reach this type of coverage sometimes in very short time in a very short period of time. So definitely the beauty contest is better than the traditional auction, but the obligation has to be reviewed by the authorities in order to have a balanced position and a truly positive way to develop the networks. Is it possible right now in Latin America? I see the situation difficult because there are two. There are two type of costs of the spectrum. One is the upfront cost that will be resolved using a beauty contest. But what happened with the recurring charges, the charges for the usage or the this is very also these are very high costs in Latin America. So this has to be reviewed as well. Countries, for example, like Ecuador, it has a huge amount of money paid by the operators every single year, and it's not possible to deploy this type of networks with the need of very high investment in this under these conditions. Mexico is another example. So there are, as I mentioned earlier, is necessary to change the whole environment in order to have a proper the proper conditions to deploy this this new technology in our region.
Thanks, Maryleana. And two very important points you brought here, which refers to the investment commitments in the beauty contest format. That is, even if we put very low spectrum fees upfront, spectrum fees, but require like 80% coverage in the first 2 years of operations of the new technology. For many operators, that looks very unfeasible. And another important point you brought refers to the recurring spectrum fees, not only the upfront payment, but the annual fees. We've seen that in Mexico right this year, this discussion, the parliament watered down the proposal by the finance ministry to up the recurrent annual fees on spectrum. But anyways, it is already a significant increase, and the industry complains about that, saying that this will halt and disrupt the development of mobile broadband. I want to ask you, sticking to this spectrum recurring spectrum fees, about Mexico. How did you see the discussion in Parliament, and what is ASIET doing in terms of dialogue with the public sector to get things resolved in that way?
Well, it was a very important. There was a very important discussion in Mexico regarding this spectrum fees. Actually, we met twice with the ministry, not with the ministry, but with the finance director, which was the person directly involved in the setting of this proposal. One important thing to mention here was the role of the regulator. The IFT, the IFETEL, launched a study regarding the high cost of spectrum in Mexico. I think this was the first time that a regulator set a position regarding the need of the lower spectrum fees in order to develop the connectivity in Mexico, which was very positive because it was a technical approach to the problem, and that was the positive thing. The other positive thing is that the discussion in the Congress was a very high level discussion in terms of really to understand what is happening with the spectrum, why is the spectrum important, how is the industry functioning, how is the technical functionality of the networks, and this was positive as well. At the end, there was reversion of part of the decision or of the proposal to have a higher cost of the spectrum in Mexico, but still there is a long path to go, because even though there was no change in terms of certain spectrum bands, the whole position is still in question, because the spectrum fees are still very high in Mexico, and this definitely affect the operators, but more than that, it affects the deployment of the networks and the closure of the digital divide. So it was actually ASIET was involved in these discussions. We have our director locally in Mexico, and he was present in almost the whole discussions. And we think that, no, as I mentioned, ASIET was involved in all the discussions in Mexico, and we think we still have a long path to go in order to have lower spectrum fees in the region in general.
Okay, thanks, Maryleana. And when we talk about fees and costs, not only in terms of spectrum, but in telecoms in general, we have to talk about Brazil. I know Eduardo is very much involved in the discussions in Brazil. You mentioned, Eduardo, Brazil and Peru as having high spectrum costs. I wanted to ask you, based on your interactions with the government, with regulators, with Anatel in Brazil, what are the perspectives for having in the upcoming spectrum tender lower fees, upfront fees, and what can we expect in terms of the other fees that are also related to the deployment of telecoms? As Maryleana was saying, here in Brazil, we don't have the recurrent annual fees for spectrum, but we have a lot of taxes over telecom services. So Eduardo, if you can please go over a little bit on this taxation and regulatory framework.
Yeah, no, I think in Brazil I think for first time we have very good discussion, and I think we were able to show the benefits for the government if they charge less on the spectrum, and but then on the other side we are going to build a very strong infrastructure, because this is the digital infrastructure for the future, to digitalize the industry. And I think it's going to the right direction. And we have had many discussions about that. But as Maryleana said, there are other costs as well. For instance, once that I believe we are going to have the right auction here in Brazil. But then after that, we have, for instance, we have the taxes. In general, is very high for all Latin America countries. Not all, but most of them. I can take a comparison here in Brazil. If you look at the telecom tax, is the same the tax that we pay in a beer or cigars. So we need to rethink about that, because this is an infrastructure. This is the basic infrastructure where people could be educated, where we can improve health, where we can improve the efficiency of the industry. So it's important that, but there are other things that we need to look. But of course, this is step by step. And another point that we need to consider and look very close is the antennas part, because when we start to implement 5G in Latin America countries, we are going to see that the antennas will increase by 5-6 times if you compare with the current technology that we have available. And of course, this is another bottleneck for us. It's not only about cost in order to get the permits, but also the time. Because in some countries we have a good change, sometimes we spend 1 month to install one antenna, but in some cities you could wait for 2 years. So this is a bottleneck. This is something that we need to look carefully as well, because with 5G, it will increase a lot the number of antennas in all cities.
Yeah, thanks, Eduardo, for that, because telecom infrastructure is a critical part in the deployment of 5G and broadband in general. And you were mentioning the antennas issue. In Brazil, this is a very similar problem Mexico faces, because most of regulations there are regarding the deployment of telecom infrastructure in municipalities and states are up to these entities, to the states and to the cities. And as Brazil, sometimes each city has its own rule and set of requirements for approving a license to install an antenna. And I want to talk about another important market here. We are seeing the development of spectrum tenders in Chile, Mexico, Brazil, Peru, Colombia. There's the third largest economy in Latin America, which is Argentina. Is more or less silent on that. Seems that Argentina is more concentrated on other things in terms of telecoms development. They are expanding their national fiber backbone and also expanding 4G and mobile broadband in general. But I wanted to ask you guys, maybe starting with Maryleana, what can you expect from Argentina? Do you see the country lagging behind its peers in Latin America in terms of 5G, or there's no rush to option 5G spectrum yet? And on top of that, I wanted you to comment on the impact of the decree by the government that froze telecom prices and label telecoms a public essential service in Argentina. Maryleana?
Thank you. The telecom market in Argentina is in a very delicate situation right now. The macroeconomy of the country, with high inflation and very strong devaluation of the currency, and at the same time, the price freeze definitely is a combination that question the legal certainty and therefore the possibility to have the financial resources to tackle the 5G deployment in the country. The decree by law is now under construction by the regulator, and for sure there is an opportunity to clarify and dimension the implications of this measure. To level the internet as an essential public service could be that only a political declaration about the importance of the service. But if this means to regulate final user tariffs, and if this means to get a stronger regulation, that will be a huge problem for the whole ecosystem in Argentina. Actually, there is an experience in the country of frozen prices 10 years ago with the fixed networks, and that caused that Argentina lagged behind in the fiber installation. After the measure was reversed, the situation improved, but right now there is a risk to once again face
I guess Eduardo
this
wants
situation.
to compliment on Argentina. Eduardo, I know Ericsson has a plant in Brazil, which also exports to other countries in the region. Maybe you can comment a little bit on the situation in Argentina.
Yeah, before I start, Maryleana, with the 5G, the delay will be close to zero. Maybe we are going to have a better communication.
Definitely. I don't know why, but my fiber is not working well today.
No, it's no. I can comment about both, Pedro. But on Argentina is a great country. You know, it's a big country. I think it is reorganized. It will take some time, but always is a super big country with super big opportunities. You know, this is how we see Argentina. We have a very good operation there, and they are restructured, you know, the debts, and I think they were successfully in this renegotiation, at least for the first part. Let's see how it will develop. And then when it comes to the factory here, yes, today we are export 40% of the production. We have 5 high-tech, factories in the world. One of them here in Brazil. We are very proud of that because we export 40% not only for Latin America countries, but for other countries as well. Especially now during the pandemic, this factory didn't stop one single day. So it was amazing because we were sending equipment to the whole world. So, and now what we are doing, we announced a big investment in this factory, 1 billion reais, and this is close to 200 million US dollars in the next 5 years, not only to put the 5G production here, but also to boost our R&D center, because we have a R&D center here in Brazil. So the factory, we at the moment, what we are doing now is put the 5G production. So soon we are going to have 5G production here in Brazil, export for Latin America countries.
Thanks, Eduardo. You gave me a great opportunity. I wanted to ask about this investment in the factory in Brazil. I know, I think this was announced last year or even in the end of 2018, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways, I wanted to ask you if you are committed, if Ericsson is committed to this figure, regardless of the macroeconomic situation and the pandemic and all those, the currency.
Yes, we are keeping the same investment announced last November, November last year, sorry, and we didn't change our plans. If you look at the telecom sector, if you look, there are two sectors with a very big resilience during the whole pandemic. One was food, that increased a lot. The second one was telecom. If you look at all sectors and telecom, because telecom was the only way to connect, to connect the people, the families. We have seen a big internet growth in all countries in Latin America. The growth was around 30% more traffic if you take the fixed and the wireless networks. Not only here in Latin America countries, but also in Europe. In Europe, it's the same. In Italy, it's 30% growth as well. And because this is the only way to communicate. If you look at a lot of people from one day to another, they start online learning. Millions of students, they change their way to learn. With online class. If you look on health, we have one health plan here in Brazil that called Sul America. They used to have 500, checks with the doctor a month, online checks. During the pandemic, it was close to 100,000 per month. So it's a big change. And this has been changed a lot during the pandemic. I believe it will continue to change because, the consumers, they change their behavior. And I don't think we are going to be back as before the pandemic. And you can see that on the traffic of the traffic of the network traffic is going up and up because the people has been changed, The people has been, consumers has been acquired a lot of things online, and it become, very, very easy. What is good, and I think it's a good combination with 5G as well, because when 5G it will come, it will support this super digitalization. We still have a lot of gaps, digital gaps in if you compare, for instance, the finance sector with agribusiness, finance is super, the digitalization of this sector is very, very good. If you look agribusiness is nothing. There is no coverage. So we need to cover those gaps, and I believe 5G will come to help on this digitalization journey.
Yeah, and Eduardo, I think we all agree on the demand side. I mean, the acceleration of digitization brought by the pandemic, we've been seeing that, but nonetheless, and we gotta highlight these points. Several major telecom operators hit the brakes in terms of spending and cut their capex plan for the year. We've seen that with América Móvil, Telefônica. Even today, I think the ABINI, the Industry Association in Brazil, brought this number that telecom infrastructure was down by 9%. And then I wanted to pick up from there to talk about, because we were talking about regulation and those roadblocks, and I want to talk about macroeconomics and the pandemic and currency, which were elements that Maryleana brought in her first answer. What can we expect? We know there's the demand for the digitization and 5G is around the corner, but how can we balance that with those other factors in the balance of the macroeconomics, unemployment, the currency, and even a possible second wave of the pandemic?
Yeah, no, I think you have very good points. Do you know, during the pandemic, the whole economy collapsed. And do you know, it was a very tough year because of the devaluation. We have seen a good progress on the devaluation in the last weeks. I hope it could continue like that. But in general, we need to remember that the volatility of all Latin America accounts is much higher than any country in Europe or if you compare with US. This is our reality. So we have a combination of several things. One is the economy that was very, very weak. Second is the devaluation. And third one, it was the lack of investment, because even though the traffic of the network increased, as you mentioned, Pedro, the investment went down, because of course, if you have a more employment rate increasing, do you know, and people spend less, of course, the first thing, do you know, as operator you do is to reduce the capex, but it's not only in our industry. This goes for all industries. But I believe it will be a momentary thing, because you know, the traffic is going up. Investment will come in the next months, maybe not in Q1 next year, but maybe starting Q2 next year. And on top of that, we are going to have 5G in a couple of countries. I think this will help as well to bring more investments in our sector.
Guys, I think we can take some questions. Yeah, Maryleana, we're back. You're back.
Yeah, I'm back. I changed my computer. Let's see if this works better.
No problem. We are taking some questions now from the audience. Apparently, there are some very good ones here. There's one here from Fernand Izquierdo. He's asking about the government allocating spectrum directly for industries. He's referring here, obviously, to the private networks. This is also a major trend in the industry, in the telecom industry, and many regulators are talking about that and seeing if they can set aside a part of the spectrum for private networks. I wanted to ask both of you guys, how do you see this trend of setting aside spectrum for industries directly, or if it's better that the industry, like a mining company or agribusiness, ink agreements directly with operator and instead of owning spectrum? How do you see that?
We have to take into consideration that if the spectrum is assigned directly to the vertical industry, it's going to be a kind of artificial scarcity of the resource. So we have to be careful about that, because this could raise the price, and this is something that is not good for the whole ecosystem. The experiences, for example, in Germany, as far as I know, there was a specific reserve for the industry, but at the end, the regulator didn't have any demand directly for the specific industry, and considering the strength the automotive industry, for example, in Germany, means that probably it's going to be very difficult for these vertical industries to get the spectrum by themselves, and have all of the network deployment and all the configurations and everything. This is something that it has to be reviewed, but from our point of view, it's better to assign the spectrum to the specialists.
Okay,
There are the
Eduardo.
operators.
Okay, yeah, Eduardo.
Yeah, I think it will change a lot country by country. In Germany, we have seen the government doing, put a lot of allocations for spectrum for the industry. But I don't think that here in Latin America, I don't see the same trends. I think it will depend country by country. I know that here in Brazil, there are discussions. You have some industry pushing very hard to have a license, but it's difficult to predict if it will gonna happen or not. I think it will be country by country base.
Okay, guys, we have just a few more minutes here in the webinar, so I wanted to ask you to be a little brief on the next answers. We have one more very good question from Joe Mladek. I'm sorry, Joe, if I mispronounced your surname. So he's saying actually that many Latin countries adopted APEC spectrum bands for 4G, 700 megahertz band, 28 and 26. He's asking if there is some sort of alignment towards North America standards, and or how do you see these spectrum alignments between the countries? Because this is also very important for scale, for industry scale, right? So what can you comment on have this alignment in terms of spectrum bands?
Now, I think here in it's difficult I can take the case of Brazil. I think it's more aligned with Europe than US, but you have some alignments with US as well. If you look in Chile, I think they are more aligned with US bands, but with some not 100%. I think it changes a lot country by country, and also frequency by frequency. But as this is a very important point, because it's important that we have a synchronization, because then we can build a much stronger ecosystem.
Exactly. Maryleana, do you want to comment? Do you see, we know that 3.5 gigahertz is like the prime band for 5G right now, the top one being assigned elsewhere. How do you see the need for spectrum alignment between the countries, having in mind the industry scale in terms of devices and all those kind of things?
Yes, I agree with Eduardo. Basically, that the ideal situation is to have a harmonized identification and assignment of the spectrum in the whole Latin American region, in order to have enough economy of scale. But this is something that is still is in Latin America, country by country, and I think at the end, all the spectrum is going to be 5G spectrum. So the important thing right now is to have the proper plans, spectrum plans in the countries, and to set all the tenders and beauty contests with enough spectrum for the operators to have this contiguous spectrum necessary for the 5G deployment.
Great, thanks, Maryleana. Seb, do you think we have time for just one more question from the audience?
Sure, Pedro. One more question. Let's do the last question before closing this out.
Very brief one. This is, I think, very objective. What Cesar Verdugo is asking about the current adoption for 4G in Latin America and the projection increase for 5G. This is interesting. What will be the fate of 4G in the first years of 5G? Maybe Eduardo?
Yeah, I think this is a very good point. They will stay together. You are not going to kill 4G. So the whole infrastructure is done to them to live together. And of course, later you can move towards 5G, but using the whole infrastructure that we have available. Just to you to understand, since March 2017, we are deploying 4G radios that all of them are 5G ready. So since March 2017, of course, the operators, they cannot invest again and again and again. So we are building networks that you can use the current footprint in order to grow for the new technologies. So this is how it works.
Thanks, Eduardo. Maryleana, just very briefly, 4G will still be the majority of the connections, right?
Right, definitely. For some years, it's going to be the dominant, I will say, network, and at the end, it's going to be side by side with the 5G for some time as well. So this is an important investment, and it has to be used for the years to come.
All right. Well, I guess that's it. With that, I thank once again Maryleana and Eduardo for this great conversation, very insightful remarks and points on the telecom industry and the 5G. Thank you again, the audience, for the interest. And with that, I pass on back to Sebastian for the closure. Seb?
Thank you, Pedro. We want to thank once again the panelists Eduardo Ricotta and Maryleana Mendez for participating, and you, the audience, for listening in. You will soon receive an email with instructions on how to download our ICT 2021 Outlook report. We also invite you to visit bnamericas.com to find out more about our content. Thank you and have a great day.
Clients change, businesses change. The world is transforming faster than ever, and the opportunities are there, waiting for us. Over 20 years of digital innovation have turned us into the leading business intelligence provider in Latin America. BN Americas has a database with thousands of industrial projects, company profiles, key contacts, news, reports, and data, all in one easy-to-use platform. Every day, more than 50 on-the-ground journalists and experts analyze the region's major industries. Explore projects that feature opportunities for your business. Find the companies participating in those projects and connect with their decision makers. Make the best business decisions with all the facts and insights you need about the industries that are driving the Latin American economy. Get timely reports with the latest news about projects, regulations, and investments. Stay on top of the business trends. Find out what the risks and opportunities are for your business by reading the reports and analysis of our on-the-ground experts throughout Latin America. Redefine your business strategy and choose the path to success. BN Americas, connecting opportunities.